quite often have diversified into pictures, films, like Magical Mystery Tour and, of course, Broad Street. Now, the critical failure of Broad Street...
Both of them, Magical Mystery Tour too. Yeah.
Does that really bother you?
Yeah.
On what level does it bother?
The human level. You know, nobody likes to have their wrist slapped, you know. Nobody likes it. You don't like it at school when you get exam results and you haven't done as well as you thought you had. And it's the same, you know, you think you're doing something good and you put everything into it and you don't get it right. So nobody likes to be told they don't get it right. In fact, what's happened with Magical Mystery Tour, I think, is that now it's got a lot of people who like it, whereas what happened was it actually came out on, I think it was Boxing Day or Christmas Day, and it was what I call the Bruce Forsyth slot. You know, it should have been, hello viewers, how are you, happy Christmas, had your Christmas pud? It was that slot, and it was all, I Am The Walrus, you know, and it was just not what the majority of those 20 million viewers expected. So it got kind of slammed, I think, from that kind of angle. But you won't find any other footage of John Lennon singing I Am The Walrus. I mean, I think that's a great sequence.
Everybody, welcome to episode 230 of Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. We are a solo Paul McCartney talk show, but we're going to do a little Beatles Paul today. As you can see, we have a special guest, but first, I'm Tom Hunyadi. You may know me from my other show, Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles video cast, and I'm joined by my partner in crime. He's my backwards traveler. He is Andy Nichols. Andy, my friend.
Good evening, Thomas, and looking forward to a nice discussion tonight with somebody that's been on one of your shows previously, but I've not met yet, and looking forward to talking to him.
Yeah, we've the other show, Talk More Talk, we did have our guest on, and I'm going to introduce him now. He's Steve Matteo, and he is the author of The Beatles on the Film, Act Naturally, a book dealing with all things Beatle films, not just the films, but also the culture, the scene of the time. I mean, the drugs that influenced them, the movies that influenced them, you know, all the things going on during those years of their films. And Steve, how are you? Welcome to the show, and glad we finally got you on to talk about this book, Act Naturally.
It's great to be here with you, Tom. Nice to finally meet you, Andy. And the book it's actually Act Naturally, The Beatles on Film. And it's a little confusing the way they did the cover. I would not have done it the way that they did it, because it is at the top, The Beatles.
Yeah.
Film.
Right.
So, you know, what can you do?
But right. So when we were talking about getting you on, we were talking about, okay, well, what can, you know, we talk about, obviously, we want to try to make it Paul-centric, and it was just like light bulb, hello, Magical Mystery Tour. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, Steve, talk about putting this book together, because like I said, I mean, it's just not about the films. It's about that time, right? And is that really what you wanted to also, you know, bring to the book?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that, you know, from A Hard Day's Night to Let It Be, that's almost the entire history of the Beatles, say, since Ringo joined the group. You know, so it covers, you know, it really covers a great deal of their time together. Obviously, some of the early albums had come out before A Hard Day's Night. So, I mean, yeah, that was part of it. But I mean, the main impetus was just there has not been a book on all the films in a long time. You know, there's been some really good books, and there's been some books that deal with an individual film. There's been many, for example, on A Hard Day's Night. But I just felt that at this point, there's been reissues of all the films pretty much, except for Let It Be, on DVD and Blu-ray. And, you know, the soundtrack albums have been reissued on CD and vinyl. And with the Get Back series, which was just kind of happening as the project was taking off, which was, you know, very serendipitous, it just felt right. And I wanted to add a lot of context. And I wanted to be a lot about, the music that they were making, what other music was there, a lot about the British films of the 60s and culture, like you said, how is the culture influencing them? I mean, with the Magical Mystery Tour Yellow Submarine section, I
Right.
really have a lot of context in this sort of psychedelic culture, what's happening with that, the many layers of the onion, so to speak, of that, mostly in London and San Francisco. So yeah, I mean, that was kind of the idea.
Mm. The book itself, when we're talking, again, each individual film, was there a lot to go on? You mentioned there was books in the past that dealt with the films. Talk about obviously now you've got so many tools at your fingertips to use. So was it a little bit more easier maybe than past writers had dealing with this film? Just talk about the writing process and the research process.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I started out when I did this project, like you guys, I'm a collector of Beatles stuff, and I probably had about 180 Beatle books when I started out the project, and then as I went along, I kept sort of adding. I'm probably closer to 250 now, which I know that sounds
Yeah.
insane, but I mean, there are certain books that are like, no matter what, when you're writing about the Beatles, they become the main books, particularly for chronologies. Like obviously Mark Lewison's recording sessions. I think the Barry Miles books, have a lot of great sort of chronology. The John C. Wynne books, are great in terms of chronology. And then there's been some books on the films, obviously, and I mentioned them. I do a very extensive, as you know, sort of preamble in the sort of introduction about a lot of the books that I used specific to various parts of the book. So yeah, it becomes significant. Certain books. There's books on the unreleased Beatles music and films. But then there's so many other books that you end up using. Whatever
Right.
they biographies or histories. Books about NEMS, about Apple. The different memoirs, autobiographies, cultural histories. I mean, there's a very extensive, again, as you know, a very extensive bibliography at the end of the book. But I do in the front, say, hey, these are sort of the main books that I dealt with almost daily in terms of, how I wrote and more researching the book. I mean, I'm a journalist, so research is sort of the main thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and it is, and all those books in one way can help. I mean, you got like something like Zapple or something by Barry Miles. I mean, there's the underground scene, which may came and helped for to kind of understand what they're doing with Magical Mystery Tour. There's so many different books out there that can tie into these of a book on the films. So definitely so thank God we've got all these books, one way or the other, you know. So, but when you get to Magical Mystery Tour, let's say, I mean, obviously we've got the DVD that came out, what 10 years ago now, as it was
2014 or 2012.
it was a 12 or something like that.
Really, was it
You
that
know,
long? Wow. Okay.
yeah, you got a you got a commentary track on there. You from Paul. You've got other talking heads in there. But how much was out there for Magical Mystery Tour besides that DVD? I mean, obviously you've got books on there as well. But when it comes to like shooting schedule and hotels that they stayed at and stuff like that, just talk about you know digging into the Magical Mystery Tour research.
Well, again, I mean, with the chronology, I really relied a lot on Mark Lewison, on Barry Miles, on John C. Wynne, on any books that are sort of diaries or
'Cause
chronology.
Lewison's book is great because that's only the recording session. So any gap in time in a recording session around that time would have been about they're okay, now they're probably filming
Right.
which is a great way to just kind of deduce and figure out where to go next.
Right. But I guess I forgot one other book I really should mention is, there is the other Lewison book, which is like the day by day book, which
Yeah.
is every. So that book really almost was even really more significant in terms of Mark's books. And of course, Mark did a book on A Hard Day's Night. So that for that section was very helpful. I think that Tony Barrow did a book, I believe, on Magical Mystery Tour. And then Tony Bramwell, he was involved a lot with the visual side of what the Beatles did. So his book, was also very helpful. And I interviewed him. I had interviewed him for my previous Beatles book also. So, he was very helpful. But I mean, I really, there are a lot of different sources, and it's, I could spend a day and I'm just dealing with one source. So I could spend a day where I'm dealing with 4 different books or 3 different articles or 2 different Blu-rays. I mean, I always try to, as a journalist, to try to get more than one source on something. You want to have multiple sources because, as some of these books, as good as they are and as accurate as they are, over the years, sometimes incorrect information gets picked up and repeated, and it becomes sort of gospel.
Yep.
I mean, that's what's so great about Mark Lewison's books. I mean, he starts from the ground up with, real hardcore research. And it's almost like he's not even looking at anything else. And it's almost like he's trying to block out his memory, and just go on real
facts.
He is a true journalist, historian. I mean, he's like Robert Caro or someone like that. I mean, the level of diligence. I mean, we all look to him. I think he is, any of us who try to write these books, Mark is really, I mean, Mark, of course, Bruce, I think Ken Womack now, important in terms of what he's doing. He's really creating a real large body of work. Obviously the McCartney, as you folks know better than anybody, the McCartney bio, the first volume, and that is definitive. There's no question about it. So, these are the folks that inspire me. And, and like the two of you, fortunately, I've been able to get to know some of these folks through the years. And they're wonderful people, too, as you know.
Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. And, in Ken's book right here, Living the Beatles Legend, with the Mel Evans. I mean, there was some good information in there about, with Mel involving Magical Mystery Tour. So it was
up to that part,
then,
I just started reading it. I'm up to maybe page 70.
okay.
But I'm just loving it. That's my Christmas gift. I feel like I'm that book. I don't need anything else for Christmas. I'm reading.
Right.
Yeah, it's been a tremendous read so far. I'm about 100 and some odd pages into it myself.
Oh.
Fantastic book so far.
Right. Let's talk a little bit again. You put in at the beginning of the Magical Mystery Tour chapter pretty much the history of acid, because again that was pretty much their drug of choice. And I've always say my favorite interview of Paul's of any point in time is his 1967 backyard interview with him talking to the press about whether or not he's taking acid or not. But talk about that. Was that important because of the fact that, that's that was part of the culture, right? That was a big part of the Summer of Love. And just talk about that for a minute.
What is happening is all across the culture, whether it's music or movies or art, photography, dance, design. Whatever it is all being influenced by whatever this psychedelic experience is. And obviously the Beatles had already been smoking marijuana, or as the Ruddles put it, the pleasures of tea. So, it's also, it's a psychedelic substance. And so, LSD is the sort of the next phase. And, when I talk about this, I don't condone it, but I'm not criticizing it. I approach it as a journalist. And so I talked about the people who are central to it, people like, Dr. Leary, for example, and there was many other folks, and, Owsley,
yes.
And talk about it and the music, psychedelic music, basically what it is it is trying to replicate through music whatever the psychedelic experience is. And, some argue that you can have these experiences, without drugs, I remember once I saw an interview, I mentioned this on another interview I did. There was an interview with Jerry Garcia that Dennis Elsis did, who's on the Beatles channel. I'm in New York. He's a famous DJ
Formerly
here.
NEW.
Right. The greatest FM radio station ever, probably, WNEW FM.
That's right.
And so he asked Jerry Garcia, and this is a television interview, he said, do you need to be on drugs to listen to the music of the Grateful Dead? And he asked with a very sort of straight face, and I don't remember what Jerry's amazing answer was, but I thought, once he asked the question, my retort would have been, well, it wouldn't hurt, So, I try to approach this almost clinically, like as a historian, as a journalist, not as somebody who is, advocating, say. And I just kind of put it out there how significant it is, at this time. And it becomes the situation more of how the culture influences the Beatles and the Beatles influence the culture, and how London is part of the psychedelic scene very much. I think people automatically think, oh, San Francisco, that's the place where it's kind of all happening with Owsley and Ken Kesey and all the psychedelic bands. But I mean, the psychedelic music scene is very much happening in London with the Beatles, with Pink Floyd, with Soft Machine, with, any number of groups. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Procol Harum, you could argue, fit into that to some degree. Traffic. I mean, Traffic were supposed to be in Magical Mystery Tour. If you have that box set with Blu-ray and the DVD and the EP and the booklet, on the extras, they have the clip of Traffic, who was supposed to be in Magical Mystery Tour. By the way, doing a song called Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush, which they did do that song in a movie of the same title, and that was written by Hunter Davies. So interesting little sort of tidbit there. I don't remember if he wrote the script and the book that it was based on, or just wrote the book, but interesting. And in that movie, Traffic is in that, and so is the Spencer Davis Group, which is obviously the group that Steve Winwood was in before he formed Traffic.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. How familiar with the cinema of the 60s? Cinema in London, UK. How familiar were you with that prior to writing the book?
I mean, I'm always the kind of person who always has been a fan of 60s British movies. I mean, I'm a huge James Bond fan. I love spy movies. Michael Caine is like, is God to me, So that period for me is very rich in terms of the directors and the actors. I mean, you've got, Sean Connery, you've got Peter Sellers, Julie Christie, Peter Finch. I mean, the list of actors is endless. And, Kubrick, who's an American, he's making his films in England. That's where he's living and where he's making his films, Blow Up gets made there by, Antonioni, who is Italian. I mean, he knows London is where it's at. And that's why he goes to England to make Blow Up, which some people feel may be the most representative film of the 60s. I mean, we could argue that one way or another. Richard Lester, an American living in London, So this is a rich period for me. I love the spy spoof films, which is kind of Help is, So I went to London over the summer, which was amazing, and I got to go to Abbey Road Studios and was inside Studio 2 in the control room. I was there for hours. I mean, so this is Mecca to me, I mean, because of the Beatles and Bond, London and England in the mid 60s is this really the center of the universe, culturally speaking,
music, film, TV,
art,
fashion,
photography, with David Bailey and, Terry O'Neill, and I mean, art with, Bridget Riley and David Hockney, I mean, it's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary time, to be the Indica Book Gallery, the Beats kind of had their coming out in that part of the world. In England later, I mean, the Beats were around since the 50s, Allen Ginsberg and people like
Right.
that.
Right. All right, so getting to Magical Mystery Tour, for the younger fans or people that just don't know, what is the Magical Mystery Tour?
Well, one of the things that I've sort of come to kind of understand is very much like Sergeant Pepper. Magical Mystery Tour is this psychedelic thing, but it's also a throwback. There's also parts of it that are a throwback to an earlier time. And in England, to go on these mystery tours, these coach rides, getting everybody together in the summer and, going out to the country or down to the beach and, singing the old songs and having a pint is a thing. So it's the Beatles taking that, but psychedelicizing it, so to speak,
Right.
and this kind of, let's just put on a show. Let's just, here's the idea and let's just do it. Let's just see what happens. And Paul created his little pie chart to kind of give a sense of what it was going to be. And it's the freewheeling Beatles is what it is. And
a lot of families
right.
would do that. They would go to Blackpool Lights. They would do, that's what they would do.
Yes.
Right. And we'll get to that pie chart for a minute in a second here, but starting it off, I mean, okay, so Paul he goes to Denver or U.S. in April of '67. Jane's 21st birthday is quickly approaching. She's in Denver, reciting what the Romeo and Juliet's play. They're doing a tour of that. Mel's traveling with Paul, and on the way back. I mean, that's when Paul. Is that when Paul has this idea? I mean, is on the plane on the plane ride back, and then that's where he comes up with this pie chart.
Right, and it was as simple as that. I mean, it's definitely Paul's show. There's no question about it. I mean, he wanted to do it, and he came up with the initial concept. I mean, I'm sure they had been toying around with what's the next movie going to be. What to do. What songs do we already have? I mean, obviously the plane ride and the pie chart is the light bulb moment, but I'm sure there was some, previous kind of thought, and I'm not going to get into people's heads. I know people love to play the parlor game of getting into the head of particularly Paul and John and their relationship, but as simple as that. And, I think it was a question too of them sort of wresting control of movie making away from the professionals, away from Richard Lester and United Artists and Walter Shenson. And not that they didn't like those people or whatever the case may be, but I think they just felt like, again, this is part of the whole sort of psychedelic thing of we can do whatever we want. I mean, this is after Pepper.
Right.
So they are the kings of the world.
And after Brian Epstein's passing as well.
But they had, but the idea was there before Brian died. So,
yes.
Right.
But they executed it without Brian. I mean, I think Brian would have been involved, and he was on board with it because that's what they wanted to do. But I mean, he would have been more helpful in terms of, booking hotels and getting people around.
Because
there's food for people, and
Right, because you write in your book, I mean, here they are, they're the biggest band in the world, but yet they can't get into a hotel or they can't get into a film studio because they didn't book it. They just think they're going to show up. Hey, we're the Beatles. We've been pampered for the last 5 years. What do you mean we can't get into your film studio?
Right, it's exactly the point, and that's why they filmed at the airplane hangar. The big Your Mother Should Know, because thought they were just going to walk into Twickenham, but it was booked, and so that the hangar became, that's a close approximation to what a big soundstage looks like. So some of what the magic is of the '60s and the Beatles is this whole just what are we thinking? Let's just do it. Now everything is focus groups and everybody's sitting around and. CGI and everything is, everything is so premeditated. It's so carefully controlled. The images are so carefully controlled, and budgets are so huge to make records, to make movies. And I still,
Yeah, let's get back to this pie chart because I mean this is the script for the most part. This is or the working script. Obviously there is no
Uh,
script. I mean it
No.
relies heavily on go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I didn't mean to interrupt. I mean, it's an outline, is what it is.
Right. It's an outline. I mean they do rely heavily on improvisation. I mean but a lot of it's here that ends up in the film, right? I mean you've got a dream sequence, you've got a stripper in a band, you've got a marathon, right? So I mean a lot of that what whatever ideas were coming in through his and Mel's head. I mean because I think Mel is credited as a co-writer on this. Or at least that's what was written in Womack's book. Or I think you're. I mean, I'm confused now. I'm
No,
reading too much about Mel.
I
Yeah.
don't remember
Too much.
what
Too
Mal's
much.
exact
Trust me.
credits were, but I think Mal did have
Yeah,
some serious credits for it. And I mean, at this point, he had been around for a long time, and he was getting more and more involved. So yeah,
right.
and Neil Aspinall. I mean, that was one of the great things where whoever was kind of around, like, oh, you have an idea, or
Run with
oh,
it.
you want to
Right.
get involved, or I mean, one of the things, and maybe I'm crazy and I'm making this up, but I'm pretty sure somewhere along the way, my research turned up that on I don't know what track it is, or if it's on one of the soundtrack albums, that Neil Aspinall was playing sitar. Not the only sitar, but
Right.
I mean,
Bass
they
guitar. Yeah.
become, and there's always been the debate, who is the fifth Beatle. I think there are
Right.
many fifth
Many.
Beatles, with Brian and George being at the top of the list, George Martin and Brian Epstein,
Right.
but
Right.
Neil and Al were so integral to everything that was happening. They had been there. Neil especially had been there, from the start.
Right. Well, thanks to the diaries that Ken Womack was able to put in his book, we've got here that the tentative title was "Roll In for the Mystery Tour," which was then written by Mel Evans.
Right.
So, but which was pretty cool. But yeah, but the whole thing right there, and then that's also in the documentary too. Is just Ringo's holding up a piece of paper with the circle in there. It's like Paul says, "Here's the idea," and he goes, "And we said great." And it's
Of
just
course.
right. But then Paul, then also in the anthology, he's like saying, he's pretty much saying, well, this was a time of ideas, So I mean, obviously, they're just, having fun. They're just so in '67 is just so busy for them, with in the recording studio because not only are they doing this, but they're also Yellow Submarine is kind of in development at this point
In
in
the
time
works
too, isn't
too.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the works. So they're not only they're refilming and doing the Yellow Submarine film, but they're also recording all of the music to go with this as well. So it's
Right.
an interesting time.
That's one of the things that I discovered in my research is there becomes a point, and it's probably 67, where it starts,
Mm,
where they're involved in so many different things at once. There's so
right,
many projects on the table that are happening. And, as psychedelic as everything was, they were quite ambitious and quite productive in this period. I mean, in,
right,
68, they record a double album,
right.
so
Yeah.
this whole post revolver period, let's call it that, once they get off
Mm,
the road and they finish revolver, I mean, it is just kind of extraordinary. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they did come off the road, that
right,
they weren't showing up at every radio station to do an interview and every TV studio to do an appearance, to plug a single or to plug an album or an EP or a tour,
right.
Yeah,
whatever.
they had the time to do this stuff, to be
Yeah,
Mm,
creative and to stretch their minds a little bit and,
yeah,
right.
kind of just see where things went, even though, it may not have been always been the best direction.
Yeah.
right. And obviously, the elephant in the room is, Magical Mystery Tour was originally shown on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas,
Right.
in black and white, and people had television screens the size of laptops, and not very good reception. There was no cable back then.
Right.
There was no
Right.
internet. Scare anybody by saying that. But I mean, so obviously it was shown a little bit later on one of the color BBC channels, and some people,
Right.
kind of got it a
And they
little
get
bit,
it.
but
Right. Yeah.
still, I think over
It's
the
too late
years,
then, though.
right, for the initial reception, which they had to kind of defend.
Right.
But I mean, over
Right.
the years, it's become this. It's one of those cult movies of the '60s, one of those cult
It
underground.
is this. Right. It's a snapshot of its time, and if you look at it that way, I know one of the I know I love Paul's response to it too. It's like, well, people like Spielberg have said,
Right.
that this is the film they were showing in film school that really influenced their film stuff. We'll
You,
take that with a grain of salt.
I mean, Magical Mystery Tour comes out before Easy Rider, so
Right. Yes.
whatever. See, I think how it's more influential, other than it being one of these underground cult films that in the 70s, most of us here in America first saw at those midnight movie screenings, is
Right.
you have all these set pieces that are almost like a precursor to music videos, but they had already been doing, these promotional clips.
Yes.
So
yeah,
they didn't have to
Rain
go.
and Paperback Writer and everything.
Writer.
With
Right.
Michael Lindsay Hogg directing
Right.
them. Yeah.
So
Right.
that's where it's more influential in some ways, I think.
One thing I learned in your book that I didn't realize was you could technically say that Magical Mystery Tour is Apple's first project, right? Because they create this new company to evade the tax issues. Let's see here. What do we got here? Technically, it was first. They relieved the tax burden in April '67. They create Beatles and Co. And then on November 17th, Beatles Limited, which was already a thing, becomes Apple Music Limited, and then finally Apple Corp.
Right.
So so
one of the
technically.
I mean, I think on the Sgt. Pepper album, I mean, doesn't it say something about Apple in England? That some of the first press or later. So it's almost actually it's before Magical Mystery Tour, but when they actually made Sgt. Pepper, it wasn't going to be an Apple project, whatever that even means, because the albums were still put out by EMI, through Parlophone.
Yeah.
Right.
So the films were still coming out, through United Artists. So whatever, Apple is like almost this vanity label thing. I mean, where it becomes significant, where Apple, and we don't want to have a whole Apple thing, is when they put out other artists, when they sign other artists, or later on when Apple will very specifically make films, and some of those were, under the direction, or the business person was actually Alan Klein, who already was in making films. He was already involved. And I get into that. I talk about Alan's background in the film world, that he wasn't just a music, guy. So there's all of that. And every time I do this, I know sometimes when I'm answering questions, I'm condensing, 20 or 30 pages of
right.
that taken
understand
to write. So, I feel like I gloss over it sometimes. So I'll apologize for that in advance.
Worries.
Encourage people to read the book.
Right. There you go. I mean, this was never going to be part of the 3-picture deal with United Artists. When did this about come to be a or BBC? I mean, this after the filming was done. I think that's when they finally went to someone at BBC, like, hey, look, we got this. Can we get it on your station?
I mean, I think originally, and again, I sometimes I forget the chronology in my book, but I believe it was NBC in America was going to show it. And when they got a sniff of what this was, they were like, forget it. This is just not. Yeah. We don't care if it's Beatles.
I wonder if they would have shown it in black and white.
I mean, I think in America, I think in terms of what kind of televisions people had in their homes, they were bigger. More people probably had color. I believe color came, way before 1967. If I'm
right,
this is the end of 1967. Whenever, I don't know if any of you know, but the what is it, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? That Christmas cartoon. Whenever that came out, color television was around in America.
So whatever was like 1950.
That one, and that's before 67 for sure.
Oh yeah, I think that was from
right,
the 50s.
Right. No, was it 50s or early 60s?
Maybe early 60s. Early 60s. Yeah, the first Rudolph one. But I'm interested in how America would have perceived Magical Mystery Tour. I think they wouldn't have hated it as much as the UK.
Oh no, I mean,
I think what the problem was showing it on Boxing Day, when people want nice warm-hearted grandma, unwrapping Christmas presents.
Yeah.
If they show it at a different time in America and all the kids know, well, the Beatles are going to be on, and all the kids in San Francisco are going to tune in, then, maybe it's different, So, we play this game all the time of what if,
Right.
with the Beatles. We're always kind of reordering the history, So,
Yeah.
but I think, when you watch it now, I think it is, you see them, I went to this number of years ago, a local theater did like a once a month, they do like music movies or music videos all night. And they did a night of all Beatle clips. And when the scene from a Magical Mystery Tour of Blue Jay Way comes on, you literally hear the audience go, oh, there's like this, oh my God, it's like this moment of like, wow, So I think that it's, perception is reality. I think perception has changed very much. And I mean, people now in their homes, I know I have, the big screen TV with the 5.1 sound system. And so if you're watching and listening that way, I think it's certainly in the comfort of your own home, with a few of your friends, I think you can have a very different experience,
Yeah, then even on a small 20-something inch TV. I mean, even the home theater and everything, the technology has improved to enjoy something like this that even 20 years ago or 30 years ago you couldn't enjoy as much now that you can. Given a setup
That's
like
true.
that.
Right. After Brian's death, September 1st, Paul arranges a meeting with the Beatles to discuss Magical Mystery Tour. George wants to go to India. I mean, with John and Ringo, they're on board with this too. But it's Paul that convinces them, like, no, Magical Mystery Tour is what we should be doing right now. So obviously, then they agree and they postpone that trip to '68, as we know. But Paul, I mean, just seems to be, really pushing these ideas or pushing this film really hard at the time. But when you watch the movie, I mean, besides Paul and then a couple of clip things with John, I mean, the other two, is Ringo really into it? I mean, even though he's kind of like the lead character, George, besides Blue Jay Way, and the strip tease, he doesn't really seem like. Obviously, I think his head's more into the Maharishi at the time.
Yeah, I think they're all in a different place. Obviously, Paul is driving it. I think John's kind of going along and actually getting involved in writing up some ideas and, is enjoying having fun and being silly and, being John.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ringo is sort of like whatever everybody else wants to do.
Yeah.
And I think George, for a while now, has been sort of like this gradually pulling away. That he wants to explore, he wants to go inside, and he's with Patty Boyd right now, and he's kind of wanting to be more of a contributor to the group as a songwriter. So he's always constantly in this kind of mode of moving away, where Paul senses right away as soon as Brian dies.
That's what I was going to say. Paul, that was once that happens, Paul's panic weighed in, and he was like, "Look, we're going to go all in on this, and I'm going to guide this band through this. And I don't really know what it's going to be, but we're just going to fly by the seat of our pants, figure it out." And because to think about the alternative without a father figure like Brian was very traumatic for them, and Paul too, on a lot of levels. So that's kind of why he was just like, "This is what we're doing," and they did it.
Yeah, Brian is gone. They're getting a little bit older now. They're sort of like they've been to the top of the mountain. They're all living their own lives too. They're growing up, and then girlfriends and wives and children and outside interests, and so Paul is just plugged into so much. He's into the Indica Book Gallery, and he's avant-garde films, and he's into going to the theater with Jane. And he's I think ambitious comes across as a negative phrase. I just think he likes to be busy, and I just think he's this incredibly creative person who wants to be creative. He wants to constantly create. It's what I think he enjoys it. And I think here's the key is I think he sees the joy that it brings to other people. And I think he really loves that. I think it's a positive. He sees it as this positive force.
I think you can still call it ambitious. It's still the same
Right,
thing.
right. But I think sometimes that gets, I'm not saying between the three of us, but I'm saying sometimes with people that gets perceived almost negatively.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they might oh, Paul, he's always doing but he genuinely loves doing it all. Right.
But I think part of it too is, continuing that search for inspiration to be, to continue to create. Whether it's coming from avant-garde stuff or your very commercial stuff. I mean, he's always looking for stuff to inspire him. I would say during that period. The bus, which I guess maybe should have got a credit of its own too, because I mean that plays a big part, in the film. You right here. It was a 1959 60-seat British Bedford Vale panorama elite. They ended up painting Magical Mystery Tour on it. So I mean, in a way, I mean it is pretty much, even though Ringo might be the lead character, I mean in a way the bus is really actually, the central part of the film.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it was Ken Kesey who said you're either on the bus or you're off the bus. I mean, they're taking that mystery ride, the old British seaside mystery drive, and they're mixing it with the Merry Pranksters, with the psychedelic school bus with the word further misspelled on the front rather than what the destination is. So again, there's this yin yang thing that's going on that's really wonderful. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Beatles psychedelic period musically holds up so well, where some other musical artists from that period, the music does not hold up well because it's just all you're getting is psychedelia. Now, some people love psychedelia, it doesn't matter. But I think that the way the Beatles kind of mix the old and the new, and I mean, that's got to do with the great songwriting and the fact that their records are so well produced by George Martin at EMI Studios. So it is interesting how it all comes about. But yeah, the bus is a main character, and I tried very hard to get the exact what bus is this, and it was very difficult. And I keep waiting for somebody to come to me and say, well, no, Steve, it wasn't a 450 or whatever it is, it was a 455 or something. Okay. I'm still waiting for somebody to catch me that I didn't get it right, but maybe I did get it absolutely correct, because that took a long time to try to. I almost got to a point where, like, is this really exact? Because I looked at drawings and I looked at web pages and stuff, because I wanted to know exactly where did this bus come from? Why this bus?
And you give a little bit of trivia too, and I'll say ask it, and then we'll see if anybody can guess it and put it in the comments. What other film did this bus appear in? This happened a couple years later. I will say it is. I don't know. Should I say who stars in the film, or say
sure?
Sure. Okay, Michael Caine. It's a Michael Caine film, and if you can guess, what film that is that this bus also appears in, then we'll give you 10 points for whatever. But the filming starts September 11th, right? And right off the bat, they're discovering delays. Right, the bus is initially 2 hours late to begin with that day. Everybody is there, but then their traffic and the press is just hounding them from the bit, and you can see clips on that Magical Mystery Tour DVD as well of them being bombarded by the press.
It's kind of amazing that they were so open. Like, you can see photographs and outtakes where fans would just be mingling around, and the Beatles were like, yeah, that's okay, you guys can hang out. Like, there wasn't this insanity of Beatlemania where they were ripping their clothes off. So imagine you're any of these people who knew where they were and went there, and they were just hanging out, and you could just kind of talk to them. I mean, it's just incredible. It's just to think that you could have that kind of access and proximity, at this point, because they are still, the kind of the biggest thing in the world.
That's interesting. Is that because they're growing that audience, the UK? I mean, they're maturing with the Beatles. Like, if they were to film this in the US, it might have been a completely different scene,
Yes.
right? I
Oh,
mean, you're
totally.
probably still getting, screaming girls going out there. If they're doing, yeah. So I mean, as it's a whole different
That's
scene
why they went out
with
to the
them in
West
the
Country to
UK,
go do it.
right? Right.
But they
So,
couldn't
but
completely
but
escape people or the press, and
right, right. Yeah, but I mean, the Bonzos, their instruments were stolen, so it's just like it was like one thing after another during this. Let's see here. Going here, we got where am I here? The Death Cab for Cutie scene. This film September 18th. That for first week though, I mean, that was just kind of like all just ad lib stuff, improvising. You know, going to the army base, that was the following week, or was that the first, or I'm sorry, the air base?
I think that came later. I believe.
You
That
mean
came
for I Am the
later, right?
Walrus?
Yet they had to.
Yeah, yeah,
Go. At first, it was just like stops along the way at
socks
more,
along the way, right?
know, more country, out in the
Right,
country, or close to the sea or whatever. It's just sort of getting out there and just getting started, and filming inside the bus, and the that magical mystery tour package that we talked about before. I mean, that the
right.
there has a pretty good chronology. I mean, there was some pieces, or different days or whatever. I couldn't necessarily match it up exactly with some other sources, so it got a little tricky. But you try to do your best with these things. There's always going
Oh,
to
of
be someone
course.
who's going to say, well, at 3:30 on September 8th,
Yeah, I mean that's
they didn't have a
Right.
hamburger, they ate a hot dog.
Yeah. Right.
well, that's
But I
that's
really
just
have not
silly.
much in the way of
Right.
anybody coming to me and finding.
Right.
I almost wish people would just, because there's going to be things that you get wrong for
Well, of
whatever,
course.
and you want to
Of
get it
course.
right.
Yeah.
Doing me it's a learning experience too. I mean,
Yes.
I love the
Right.
Beatles, journalist. I've written a lot about them. I wrote another book on them previous to this one. But as you do it, you're really learning, and you're increasing your knowledge of this thing that you're so interested in, which is this group, the Beatles.
Right.
Yeah, and
Um,
learning as you
another
go too.
Yeah,
right. Another important date you got here, September 20th. That's when I Am the Walrus segment is filmed. Funny enough, is then the Ruddles, that Ruddles show. I mean, they actually filmed their Cheese and Onions. They're not. I'm sorry, not Cheese and. Was it Cheese and Onions? Am I thinking, or
No,
am I
that's an
thinking?
animated video.
No. Which one of my song am I thinking? Um.
I'm having a senior moment.
Double back
Yeah, I
alley? I
know,
don't
Yeah,
know.
but
Oh no. I know the one
no.
you mean. It's the I Am the Walrus spoof. I know. I
right.
can't.
It's their,
Piggy in the
yes,
middle.
exactly.
Piggy in the middle.
Piggy in the middle. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So they film. And I'm watching Magical Mystery Tour the other day, and I'm waiting for that plane to come up behind the bobbies that are up on the wall. But then I'm like, oh no, that's the Ruddles when that
Right.
happens,
Well,
because they shot
the Beatles and the Ruddles, they're
right,
almost indistinguishable if you think about it.
True.
right, because they shot that scene at the very same spot that the Beatles filmed I Am the
Right.
Walrus.
Right.
Yeah. Then they also
Much
filmed.
to Paul's chagrin.
Oh, this is great. Yeah.
Yes.
The next
Exactly.
day, they filmed most of Blue Jay Way, which is another favorite segment of mine. I know a lot of people crap on Blue Jay Way, but I dig
I
it, and I
love.
really dig that. I dig that scene. I really think it's cool. He's just there, and he draws up the was it the keyboards or whatever for that. Really cool scene. Then we got pretty much, you got 10 hours of footage, and you got to try to bring it down to an hour film. I mean, they take it to Norman's Film Productions in London. They think it's only going to take what, 1 or 2 weeks to bring
Right.
this down. It ended up taking 11 weeks, and obviously they still had more stuff to film as well.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and they had a lot of help, as I detail in the book, not to make a joke, and
Yeah.
and that's, I think, how it gets down to basically 45 minutes or 53 minutes or whatever it is.
Right.
I think the sense is, do we really have a feature length film here? And I
Yeah.
think Cooler
Right.
sort of say, well, maybe not. And, it doesn't have to be 90 minutes or 80 or 70 minutes,
Hey,
So then I
Steve,
think they're probably thinking, well, maybe we can show this on television. Maybe this is a television show,
do you know what the running time of the film is without the musical numbers in it, Steve? I'm curious if you know that number off the top of your head.
I don't think I ever really sat down and tried to figure that out.
I wonder what that. I wonder if it's like 25 minutes or something.
I mean, supposedly the musical numbers are supposed to be part of the narrative that tells the story.
True.
Right.
So, it's, you could probably teach a whole class on Magical Mystery Tour. I think it's,
probably
it is, there's a lot to unpack with it, and obviously some of it can be a little negative. There's no question about it.
Yeah. The, one of my favorite segments is the first, true, song, I guess, of the show. So you got your Paul. They fly to Paul with Mel and the cameraman Audrey Dewar. They fly to Nice, France, to film the Fool on the Hill sequence. For me personally, that's one of my favorites. I mean, Andy, what do you think about that segment?
Oh, that's a definite highlight, and I enjoy Paul's summary of that thing, talking about how it was just him and some friends doing it. It wasn't a Beatle project. They just went to France and did it and to film it. It wasn't exactly a group thing, as he talks about it in the anthology. Certainly a highlight with the sunset and everything, just shot so well. Paul with the coat on and everything and the hair. It certainly wasn't him just, frolicking and running around. It certainly is of the era, and definitely one of the highlights of the film. I mean, that and I Am the Walrus for me. And Your Mother Should Know. I just love that scene.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you get like little hints of like solo stuff too. I mean, obviously Blue Jay Way, is kind of mostly, for the most part, George, until you get to that bit at the end where they're in the backyard. And then Paul with Fool,
Definitely with Fool on the Hill.
Yeah, I mean, John, doing the whole spaghetti, that was his dream. That was, again, that's kind of like a little solo bit as well. The one thing I really never really got was, maybe just because it's only 2 segments, is the whole wizard thing. Just really didn't seem to make much sense to me.
4 or 5 wizards?
Yeah, or 5 wizards, right, with Mel in there. Yeah. But this is like the segment. I don't know if they filmed more of that or not, and they just decided not to use it. But Steve, I don't know what you think about what do you think about the wizard stuff in there? It just doesn't, make sense.
I mean, how much sense it makes, I don't really know, but there is something kind of cool about seeing them dressed the way they are. And, there's obviously, there's some fun stuff going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And so, I do like that aspect of it. And it's so short, it just kind of comes and goes. I think the scene that's not that it's similar, but a scene that works better is the scene with Victor Spinetti, that works so much better.
Right.
Because Victor is just so amazing. Everybody loves Victor Spinetti.
Right, and then that segment was filmed with Paul. Again, Paul just taking on a lot of stuff, the behind the scenes. It was him that looked through the spotlight to try to find, some of the characters that are in the film. It's Paul that stays over with the cameraman saying, okay, well, we're going to do this, the next day, or talking to the people that are in the film and what they're going to film the following day. So it's really, even though Paul says he doesn't want to take all the credit for it, he pretty much has to take the credit for it, because it is his direction.
It is. I just wanted to say, you talk about Victor Spinetti. He's a nice link to the other 2 films, though. A little bit of a familiar face. That even though it's not obviously it's not Richard Lester, or it's not United Artists, but it's a nice familiar face from those earlier call back to the 2 previous Beatle films.
They just loved him. They just wanted him in every movie. He was just, they loved him for his talent, but they loved him for who he was, the person that he was. Right. Everybody you talk to that has any kind of connection or any kind of experience interacting with him, and he just continued on doing things.
Paul used him for London Town, the London Town promotional video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So obviously we talked a little bit about, it airing on Boxing Day. They aired it in black and white. I mean, you wrote that, NBC and ABC both passed on
ABC.
it after negative reviews. I'm like in the kind of camp where if you read the book Beatleness, where at this point in time, you know, Carol Leonard, I believe her name was, she was pretty much, the theory is that at this point in time, teenagers, that people that grew up with the Beatles here in America, they were kind of like on their Beatle break. So, I mean, I don't know if it would have caught on here, um, you know, any more than it would have caught it on, in the UK, whether they showed it in color or black and white. I mean, at the time that music was changing, it wasn't "She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand" anymore. I mean, this was more sophisticated stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I think it's well thought out and well put. And I guess that what happens is to maybe look at it in a more sort of general way, is I guess you have different people who come to the Beatles and leave the Beatles if they do choose to leave at different times. And then you have some people who sort of start from the beginning and maybe go all the way through, you know. So I think it's an audience that is always like any popular phenomenon of any era. I think you have different audiences at different times. I mean, how many people are of the mind of they're into the group when a certain group or artist when they're cool and underground, and then as soon as they become commercial, oh, I don't want any part.
Commercial,
I'm done with them.
right?
Yeah. Too
Or
popular.
the people that have no idea who somebody is until they're all over the charts. They have no idea where they came from. They have no idea where they
Right.
started. And I think you have some musical artists, on the other hand, who start off really pop oriented and then become really artistic and creative, or vice versa. So this is kind of all over the place. I mean, the Beatles are sort of the first to sort of set this template of starting off as this popular entertainment commodity almost that breaks the mold of everything, but then artistically continues to grow and create and set the template for almost everything. I mean, albums are not a thing really until Sgt. Pepper comes along. I mean, there's plenty of albums that we can talk about that came out before Sgt. Pepper, including obviously Rubber Soul and Revolver, that are albums, quote unquote. But Pepper becomes the moment, as the two of you know, where the album becomes this art form. It's this thing, and then suddenly everybody who wants to make really creative, interesting music, this is it. You want to make the next Pepper, or you want to make something that isn't just a collection of singles and filler. You want to make something that is a grand statement. And we get these records. They happen, and they continue to happen through the 70s. We get Dark Side of the Moon. We get Tapestry. We get Asia by Steely Dan. We get Silk Degrees by Boz Scaggs. Even Frampton Comes Alive. I mean, it's a double live album, but it becomes one of these things. Rumors. I mean, it's just
Right.
It starts with Pepper, but like I said, you have things that are already these conceptual pieces or albums that are truly artworks and not just a collection of singles and filler.
Yeah, good point. The film itself, I mean, looking back on it now, I mean, is it still? I mean, did the Beatles still boob? As they said in what Daily Mirror, I think it was. The Beatles boobed, or Paul says, "So we boobed." I mean, looking back at it now, where do you put it in its place in the Beatles film? Film wise, I mean, obviously it is of its time, right? I mean, it is. I mean, can we say it's dated, if you will?
Yeah.
I mean, sure, if you want to say that. I mean, to me, I watch it, and obviously I went back and rewatched it, and it's, you have to view it in the context of what it is. If you're going to view it in the context of the Sgt. Pepper album, then yeah, you're going to have a lot of criticism. I also think what happens with artists sometimes, and I think this is the case very much, I mentioned Prince before. With people like Prince, Neil Young, is sometimes I think they have to make certain records, or do projects that the general public or the critics kind of trash, but they need to do that as artists to get to whatever the next place is, where they're not just thinking in terms of the career or in terms of the commercial aspects. Like, they need to do certain, Neil Young needed to do, Tonight's the Night,
right,
or whatever, to get to the next place. Prince needed to do certain songs or albums to get to, these are people that get up every day and they're just writing songs from, breakfast until it's time to go to sleep. Even Neil Young just continues to,
it's amazing.
But he keeps doing new things.
But he keeps putting out new albums. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's archive stuff and new stuff. I mean, you can say the same thing for Paul in a way too. I mean, he's still creating. I mean, not on the level that Neil Young is seems to be turning stuff out. And even Elton John was putting stuff out at a quick pace here on the later half of his career. Prince, when he was still with us, I mean, the stuff that he was putting out, are turning out at at the fast pace. I mean, writing and recording, 1, 2, 3 songs a day, that's unheard of.
I mean, Van Morrison right now is just
he's on a creative.
It's just extraordinary. I mean, they just there's no, like, they don't see, to them there's no end to this. There's no farewell tour. I mean, I think Eric Clapton he does not want to come off the road right now. He just sees no good in coming off the road.
Yeah.
Bob Dylan, too. I mean, there's.
I just saw Bob Dylan 2 weeks ago.
How was he?
Fantastic.
I'll bet. I saw Dylan many times. I saw him back by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers at Madison Square Garden.
There you go.
About 6 songs into the concert, they started playing the vamp of Like a Rolling Stone, and Ron Wood walked on the stage.
Wow.
Jammed with them for the rest of the show. Unreal.
Wow. Holy cow. That's an experience.
Yep.
Steve, tell everybody where they can find a copy of Act Naturally, the Beatles on Film, and also, plug what else you've got coming up, appearances and all that stuff. Okay.
Well, obviously it's available on Amazon for everybody in the world, on the planet Earth, and maybe certain planets we don't even know about. So you can easily just go there and click and it'll be at your house tomorrow if you're an Amazon member. But, Barnes & Noble stores have it there. Websites have it. A lot of independent bookstores have it. I know that for a fact. A lot of record stores have it stocked too. You go to, like, I believe not every store for sure, but the Rough Trades and Amoebas and the places like that. I imagine that they have it, and Newberry Comics. I mean, it's there. I mean, you can find it. Wherever you go, if they don't have it, just tell them to order it. And I'm sure you'll get it. I mean, I've been doing a lot of promotion for the book. I mean, I've been doing a lot of podcasts and radio news. I've been on Sirius XM a couple of times. I've been doing, a lot of YouTube things. I've done some, print and online interviews. I did a screening at the Cinema Arts Center in Huntington in New York of A Hard Day's Night, where myself and another guy introduced it. We showed the film, and then I answered questions. It was sold out, not because I was there, but because A Hard Day's Night was being shown on the big screen, and people just kept asking questions. I mean, they literally had to shut it down, and again, not because of me, but because people just are so interested in the Beatles and the movies. And I don't know how many people came up to me or the people that ran the theater after and said, "So you're going to show Help next?" So, I did go to London, and I did an appearance there at a club where they had a couple of other musicians playing Beatles music, and I was interviewed there. I met with the British Film Institute. We may do something there next summer. People are just interested in the Beatles, and it's, when they want to do things, I know it doesn't matter if it's Steve or if it's, Ray Connolly or whoever. It doesn't matter. It's just people are just endlessly fascinated.
They're just drawn to it. Yeah.
Right.
And we've got this 60th anniversary coming up. I did the fest in Chicago. I will be at the big 60th
You're going to
anniversary.
be at the.
Were you
Okay,
there this
good.
past? Were you there? You were in Chicago?
I was in Chicago. They put me all the way in the back because they didn't want to scare any children if any children showed.
I didn't. Our paths did. I was there, and our paths did not
I was
cross.
so far in the back. I don't know why. I could have been
Right.
invisible, but that's okay.
Okay. Were you in a room?
Myself.
What
So
was that?
I had a big area all to myself. I don't know why, but
Was that near the Apple Jam stage?
no, I was in the author's room is where I was.
Oh, okay. Oh,
On a couple of panels, and got to meet some people for the first time, and some people that I've known for all these years, and I got to see my friend Billy J. Kramer, who I
yeah.
haven't seen in a while. He used to actually live here on Long Island, and
He
I've
did?
known him for almost as long as I'm married. I've known Billy for decades, so it was great to.
Oh, wow. That's too bad our
Very
paths
cool.
didn't cross out there in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, there's
So,
things I wanted to do and people I wanted to see. I mean, we got out to Chicago out of the fest a little bit, and in London, obviously, we did a lot. We went to the McCartney photo exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery, as I said.
okay.
We went to Abbey Road. We did some other Beatle-y kind of things, other music kind of things, and so I'll be continuing to do things, and I always love being interviewed by folks like you who know so much more about the Beatles than I do, for sure.
I don't think so. Whatever.
We all know our stuff.
Yeah, we know what we know. But you're going to be at the fest in February. If you have a copy, bring it along. Steve can sign it. If you want it, I'm sure you're going to have copies there for them to purchase as well.
There'll be thousands of copies of the book there. Hopefully, we'll have enough for everybody.
Thousands. Wow, that's awesome.
Wow. Talk about ambitious.
Look at Womack.
You got a joke, I guess, huh?
I got it.
Well, I tell you what, I really enjoyed, reading this. I mean, thank you. I mean, it was really cool reading the help section early. I was glad I could, assist or help you with that. But the Magical Mystery Tour really learned out because, again, like we talked about, it's not just the films. It's the time, it's the era, it's those years, it's the films of those years. It's whatever that they were, inhaling or injecting or whatever.
Well, hopefully
drinking.
they're not injecting anything. Not yet, anyway.
Right, but anyway, really enjoyable book, and I think everybody should check it out, especially if you love the films. You want to check out Act Naturally, the Beatles on Film. Steve, thank you very much for joining us. This was a real pleasure to talk about Magical Mystery Tour with you, and look forward to seeing you in February.
Yes, in February. And by the way, the book makes a wonderful Christmas gift, by the way.
There you go.
Thank you, Steve.
There you go.
Thank you for sending it.
All right. Thanks a lot. It's been great.
Yeah. So hold on, don't go anywhere yet. But Andy, anything you want to plug before? I mean, you just did an episode, right, with our frenemy.
Yeah, well, I did on my own channel. Yeah, did a show on Pete Townsend's solo album "Empty Glass" from 1980.
Wow.
With
I used
Sam
to work
Wiles.
for.
You like Pete Townsend too, Steve?
I used to work for Pete Townsend.
Oh,
really?
When he had his book publishing company.
He had an office in New York. In the late 70s, and I worked there. I mean, I literally was like the T-boy, the office.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a long story how it happened, but and then when the office closed, Pete wanted tapes of New York radio again before the internet, and I would make tapes. You mentioned WNEW-FM. I would make tapes and send it to him, and where he lived in England. And every time the Who would play in New York or he would play, I would go to the show. I go backstage and get to see Pete.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm a huge Who fan.
Me too. Me too. I'm working on my co-host there, but I'm trying to convince him to listen to this album. He hasn't heard it yet, so
that's a great. I saw the Psychoderelic tour where he did Psychoderelic straight through
in '93ish.
Yeah, and it was at Jones Beach.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the solo albums are extraordinary. Yeah, I'm a huge Townsend fan. Huge Who fan. I mean, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Kinks. I mean that's the four top.
That's it, man.
That's it.
Off
one to Ray Davies in an interview, and said, "Yeah, I get that. That's the order."
I said, sorry.
It's the Mount Rushmore of the Beatles or the British invasion right there.
Yeah,
I think
you could put the Yardbirds and Pink Floyd in there, and
they can clean. They can clean Mount Rushmore, but they're not going to be on it.
Right, Cream.
All right, anyways, and check that out on Andy's other channel. For me, Talk More Talk, we just had Ken Womack and Gary Evans on. You can check that out, and we are going to be having our last episode of the year coming on. I think we're going to do some kind of Band on the Run, Denny Lane type tribute. As we didn't mention at the beginning, we know that Denny Lane's passing, but we're going to do a proper tribute here coming soon on that. Thank you everybody that's been subscribing to our YouTube channel, Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast. We really appreciate all the new subscribers and all the ones that have been with us for many years now. So thank you and for watching and leaving all your comments. You can email us at twolegspodcast@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Two Legs. And that's going to do it for us. So thank you again, Steve. Really appreciate you taking the time. And finally, happy we made the time to get you on. Andy, we text every day, and I'm sure that won't end anytime soon. And as always, everybody out there, have a great day and a beautiful night. Take care, everyone.
Happy Christmas.
Listening to Two Legs, a Paul McCartney podcast, hosted by Tom Hunyadi and Andy Nichols, with musical contributions by Dylan